Scott, this new semi-occasional report is out talking about the state of Yellowstone Park, not necessarily the whole ecosystem. What is it telling us?
Yeah. Well, these vital signs reports for people like us who care a lot about the park are really important because they give us a feel for the overall health of Yellowstone. Some of the information in this report gets at the bigger trends that scientists are seeing related to visitation, climate issues and temperature changes, things like that. And then it also gets down to a pretty detailed level with specific species.
Do you see this as a good report? Is there good news in it?
I think some of the good news in the report points to some of the positive trends that we see for either recovering wildlife, the health of some of the different habitats in the park. But the things that jumped out to us are, of course, things like increasing visitation. More than 4 million people visiting the park now annually, and anyone who's been to the park during the summertime in the last few years will tell you that it's become much more crowded.
What issues does that raise?
Well, the concerns for us are things related to how people are getting out and enjoying Yellowstone, and of course we love to see that. People should be able to come and visit their parks and enjoy them, and our national parks need people to advocate for them, and so we certainly love to see people getting out in the parks. The crux really is how do we balance visitation and people's desire to come and see the park with some of the important natural resource management issues. And in the park you'll see things now related to parking or traffic or impacts around some of the popular thermal areas and those sorts of things. And so it's one of the reasons why the Greater Yellowstone Coalition and Montana State University convened a large symposium this past spring to really try and start a conversation about how we balance both conservation and recreation here in Greater Yellowstone.
Do you have any suggestions for the park?
Well, I think it's time for the park, and they have been talking about this more recently, but to start exploring what are some solutions for allowing people to still come into the park and enjoy it, and also at the same time making sure that all the things that we love about Yellowstone and that make it so special remain healthy and whole. So I think it's a time to start exploring some creative solutions.
Have any ideas about what those might be?
Well, if you look at places that have confronted those challenges, Arches National Park or Zion National Park or some of the other parks in our national park system have some models in place already, whether that's mass transit systems and transportation systems, whether that's like a lottery system for getting in the park on certain high volume days. I think we're at a point now where that should be part of the conversation. And obviously we want lots of people involved in that conversation because it's a complex, sensitive issue. All of us love Yellowstone and would love to spend lots and lots of time there, but we all have to realize too that the more of us that come and visit the park, the higher level of impacts there can be.
If you're giving advice to someone, a friend of yours, about visiting the park, what is that?
I tell my friends and my family to come visit Yellowstone anytime they can. I have special times of the year that I like to get in the park, whether it's the dead of winter, when you have to bundle up and really prepare for the weather, or the springtime I really enjoy in the park too. And I think more people are trying to plan their vacations around those lower use times of the year. And so the fact of the matter is there's still 4 million plus people coming to the park, and starting to confront these trends in visitation I think is an important conversation for all of us who live in these communities around the park, and certainly for the Park Service.
And then in this report, do you see any red flags? Are there any things that really concern you?
The continuing trend in visitation, the upward trend, is something really to keep an eye on. I think beyond that, some of the climate data and information they have in there with warmer, drier conditions, and that potentially having a role in wildfires in and around the park. things like reduced stream flows in streams that come from a lower snowpack in the winter. And then there's certainly some issues that are species specific related to birds or other animals that are really worthy of keeping an eye on. You know, people who love to bird watch, you know, should pay attention to the information in there about loons and how they're doing in the park. There's other interesting data in there related to some really positive stories, like the recovery of the Yellowstone grizzly bear, or the stability of the wolf population in the park, and the number of elk and bison. I mean, Yellowstone its wildlife is in good shape. It's up to us as advocates to try and keep it that way, and that's always going to be a balance.
I've recently read that park managers may have to start accepting the occurrence of what they used to consider to be invasive species, both animals and plants in the park, because of the climate change.
Yeah.
Do you see that as well? Is that a concern?
Well, that's another red flag in this vital signs report, I think, that relates to invasive species. You know, weeds have been an issue in the park for a long time, and trying to keep them at bay and beyond the park boundaries is kind of a never-ending challenge. With the changes in climate, I think that we'll see that accelerate, and we'll have to make some decisions about what we can live with and what we can't. And in a lot of cases, especially with things like invasive weeds, we're pretty limited in what we can do in terms of controlling their spread. So, you know, our environment is changing. I think any of us who've lived around here for a long period of time will tell you that our winters are changing, our summers are changing. And with that comes a response from the vegetation community and wildlife, and paying attention to that is really important, and that's why this vital signs report can be really helpful and useful for people who really care about the park.